Hey, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about bpy.context.object.pose.bones, and it's an opportunity to basically modify and work with a rig in pose mode. I'm a little tired. I didn't get much sleep last night. I'm having some coffee, so if my brain, if I sound like my brain's not firing on all cylinders, then I hope you understand. So bpy.context.object.pose.bones is one of the ways that we can get into basically manipulating a rig inside of a pose mode. It has a whole bunch of information that we can work with. So this video is just a surface level explanation, and I'm making it because I think a lot of people can get a lot of value out of just understanding some of the basics. There's a lot to get into, but I think what I'm going to describe is just enough to get your toes wet and kind of get a sense of what's going on. So yeah, I hope this is a good resource for you. So there's a few things I want to cover today. So I'm going to talk about pose mode, basically accessing the bones inside of that. And there's two other modes as well. And those are worth describing just to give some reference. And I'll talk about some kind of higher level stuff, just like how to access information, and then we'll just have fun with some of the really simple stuff that you can do in pose mode with this command. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up right here, and I'm going to go over to Python console, and that gives us access to a whole bunch of stuff. And so what I'm going to do, just so that we're all on the same page, is I'm just going to go into object mode and delete this and create a new armature, and then I'm going to tab into pose mode. Just so that we're all on the same page. Now, if I go ahead and type in bpy.context.object.pose.bones, we just are given this information. It's just like a reference to the name of the armature and then the pose bones kind of like information. And what is that information? The information is really just a list. Now, this would be best if I do this. If I do this and I show you, I hit tab, I hit period, and I hit tab, then it gives some more kind of commands and things to reference. But from here, we don't really get much that we can like play around with. So what I'm going to do instead is go like this: for bone in bpy.context.object.pose.bones, bone. And what it's going to do is it's going to list out all the bones inside of pose mode. And for now, we just have this one bone. And so instead of typing out bpy.context.object.pose.bones over and over and over for the rest of this little talk, what I'm going to do is just shorten it and go pose bones like this. So now if I type in pose bones, we get the same little bit of information. And to clarify that this is a list even more, I'm just going to take a moment and I'm going to tab into edit mode, bring this up, and then I'll make another one, so we've duplicated it, who cares, and I'll go back into pose mode. And then I type in pose bones, and I'm going to do this for bone in pose bones, bone. And now we see the list of all three of the bones that are now currently in pose mode. And so what I'm going to do, what am I going to do? So I'm going to come back and talk about these kind of things in just a moment, but for now, I just want to go over here. I'm just going to delete these. We'll just focus on this one bone right here. So I have this reference to this list. This is basically what it is. It's a reference to a list. And I can reference individual bones by saying bone, and then it just gives us the direct reference to that specific bone. And then if I do the same thing, I hit period and then tab, basically I get a whole bunch of good information. I'm going to hit control space to make this really clear. I have a whole bunch of commands I can do. So I can go ahead and do, for instance, location, which gives us the location of the bone. In pose mode, I can do scale, because it's the scale. I can do rotation. In this case, I'll do quaternion. This gives us the quaternion information. And I can even go ahead and start to modify this stuff right here. So location is currently at 0, 0, 0, as you'd expect, just like it's reflected up here. But if I do location is equal to vector, let's say, let's move it on the x-axis, by 1. 1, 0, 0. Boom, it's just moved. And then I'll just reset that. In fact, instead of resetting it by giving it the entire vector information, I'll just reference the x index, and I'll just say is equal to 0. So let's see. Oh, you know what I did? I need to do this. Dot x is equal to 0. There we go. So let's move back to the center. So this is a way to reference all this kind of information and manipulate it. And I do want to show you that pose bones, this list reference, is quite different from edit bones and also data bones, which might be confusing. That there's actually 3 lists of information. And I mentioned in the previous video that you can do some really cool stuff on edit mode. For instance, bpy.context.object.data.edit bones, and then I have a reference to that information in edit mode. I can do, say, bone, and then I can do bone.name. It tells me the name of the bone, and then let's do this one more time. Oop, my apologies. There we go. So I can get, for instance, the reference to the location of the head in edit mode, and then the same thing as the tail. And I misspelled that. So tail is at basically 1 unit up on the z-axis as it's shown right here. So I can even change that. For instance, dot z is equal to 1.5. Just makes it change there. Change it back. And then, so that's just a quick little understanding of what's available in edit mode. And the interesting thing is that can't really do anything to edit mode if you're to the this reference, this bpy.context.object.data edit bones. Suddenly forgot how to spell. Edit bones if you're in pose mode. So let me give you an example here. So let's try this out, and it'll do .tail. I might even end up creating an error or crashing. Sometimes it can do that if you're trying to reference it outside of the proper mode. So .tail.z, oops, let's reference the bone. Bone. Yeah, see, it's not allowing me to access it. But if I go back to edit mode, it just lets me access it right away. So back in pose mode, the interesting thing is pose mode kind of works from almost any mode though. So let me show you here. Pose bones, I'm going to go back to edit. I can go pose bones, bone, and then I can get information for that bone. Now I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. I'd recommend actually being in the mode because I've run into some strange quirks. You can crash the program or just kind of give you some strange information. And the bones that are available in pose mode won't be updated until you leave edit mode. So for instance, here, check this out. It's pretty cool. For bone in pose bones, bone like that. Okay, and I'm going to add a new one. I'll just shorten it or scale it down just to make it more obvious. And I'll do this again. Oh, okay, it worked this time. No, see, sometimes it's very confusing. Sometimes it does seem to work. Sometimes it doesn't. So it has included it this time. It's another quirk run into here and there. Just be aware of that. Just prove me wrong. Okay, so let's play around with this a little bit. And if you want to get a little bit better sense of kind of where I access the information, how I do things, you have, as I mentioned before, if you have a reference already, you can hit dot, period, and then tab, and then find out some more commands. In this case, bone, dot, and then a whole bunch of other information. Another thing too is what's important is go to F4, preferences, and just making sure that the Python tooltips is on. What that allows me to do is basically hover over any bit of information, and it'll give me some type of kind of command to be able to reference for information. For instance, custom shape, it'll tell me that how I can I can do this copy full data path, and I can even type that in, and I'll get to that in a second. Let's do this instead. This will be a lot easier. Height is on false, and then is equal to true. So it's just hidden. I'll do it again. False. And then what we can do is basically go like this for bone in, oh, my apologies, pose bones. Let's go ahead and rename this bone. So I know the name of it is already bone. I can just go .name is equal to bone 1. Now I can check the list for bone in pose bones. Bone, let's do that. And we can even do the same thing and go bone.name. So we can just say, see that it's named bone 1. Now I wanted to take a moment to talk about this other reference for bones, which is very interesting. It's this kind of shortened area for the data information inside that's referencing for the object is referencing. And it's the only way you can really go about selecting bones in pose mode and like changing the active bone. So let me give you an example here. So we have our pose bones reference, and then if I go pose bones dot tab, oh, let's try this out. Bone 1 dot tab. There's no option to select anywhere in here. It's not going to happen. So what you need to do is go to bpy.context.object.data.bones and then reference the bone name. And then I have some options here. So if I hit S and select, it'll tell me if it's selected or not. I can go ahead and change it to true. Now it's selected. I can turn it off. It's false. So that's a really strange one. There's not a lot of information that's hidden in that, like this kind of section, the data bones, .bones, but there's some key ones. The other key one is how to make a bone active, which is really important if you're going to do any operations. So for instance, let's rename this one. Let's go like this: bpy.context.active.pose.bone.name is equal to bone 2. Okay, so we renamed that, and just to show for bone in pose bones, bone.name. Okay, so I have those 2 bones. And what I want to do is, even though this, according to the way that you would go about kind of selecting things through clicking, you would assume that this is the active one. And I can do operations to it, like I can add a, say, a copy transform, and that's basically set to this bone. I did that with this operation. And that operation, I can find the operation if I ever want to know it through this info little section here. So for instance, let's do that one more time. Delete this empty. Do it one more time here. Copy transforms bpy.ops.pose.constraint add with targets. So it dumps into this little kind of copy, this little operation dump area in the info. Now I'm not going to go too deep into operations right now because that's like kind of a whole other subject. But I just want to show that to you in case you ever want to kind of learn any information. For instance, an easy way to learn something is just to do the operation and copy it. So I'm going to add a new armature, and right there it just showed me what the operation was. Done in order to make that occur. Excuse me. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to delete this again. I'm just going to paste this right here, and boom. So it just tells me what operation was done. But I wanted to show this to you because I wanted to explain all that to you because there's one other thing inside of this little list, which is interesting, is the active bone. And so right now what we can do is go bpy.context.object.data.bones, right? It gives us kind of reference to the bones inside of that data. And I can go I believe it's .active, there we go. It'll tell me which one's active. I can do this is equal to bpy.context.object.data.bones. Bone 1. Now, nothing looks like it changed at all on the left-hand side of the screen, but if I check what the active bone is, it's now bone 1. Let's do this for you here. There we go. So I can even change that again, back to bone 2. Let's try this here. And then I can prove it, bone 2. And if I want to do any operations on it, that bone is the active one. And so the reason I'm kind of clarifying this is because by doing operations through this, by changing the active mode through this kind of process, Blender tends not to update the viewport for that purpose. But having access to an active object and changing the active object allows you to change the operations, do different operations on different bones. Okay, so with that clarified, those are the two things that you can do with the data bones section. In fact, let me just show you one more thing. I'll show you how to select them all. So for bone in pose bones, we'll do bone.name, for instance, so we have these bones. So for bone and pose bones, let's see what we can do. bpy.context.object.data.bones.select. Let's do this. Bones, I'm going to insert this part of the for loop. Bone.select is equal to true. Okay, I didn't do that right. Bone must be a string or an int. Okay, let's isolate this and figure out what the problem is. bpy.context.object.data.bones. Bone1.select. For bone in, we can do it a different way. For bone in bpy.context.object.data.bones, bone.select is equal to true. There, I just selected all of them. I can turn them all off as well. And there is another way you can go about doing this, and it's important that I mention this because there's a very strange thing hidden inside the pose bones list. So let's go like this, back to pose bones. I go pose bones, bone 1. I said there was no select option inside of here. But if I hit bone1.bone, which is, it's referencing this data bones right here. It's the same, this information that came out of it is the same thing as bpy.context.object.data.bones, bone1. And see the information that's provided is the exact same thing. So it's a very strange system, but basically you have pose bones, bone1.bone is equal to true. Sorry, my apologies, .bone.select is equal to true. And that's how we can access it through the pose bone kind of system. And then, let's see here. So with that, all that said, I think that clarifies just kind of a general sense of kind of some higher level stuff to think about and some quirks, some potential problems as well. And so we'll just run through this real quick, one more time and talk about the rest of these things I want to show you. So once again, pose bones, bone1.name is equal to blorg. And now the name changed on the left-hand side there. Let's go like this, pose bones. And the interesting thing too is that the system absolutely requires referencing all the pose bones by name. Like there's no memory object or reference that is consistent, and it creates a lot of problems. Like I can't just go around saying like this bone with this exact information, at least from all the research I've done, there's no way to reference it. So you have to have the name of the bone and know the name of the bone to do specific things to it, or you can run through a list and do things to it depending on certain conditions. So let's go like this, blorg.location. And like I said earlier, we can just change all that information. It's equal to 0.25. Just move it up and move it back down, move it down back to its spot. I'm going to do scale. Scale dot, let's see where it's at right now. Okay, so let's go dot x is equal to 0.5. So it shrank on that little zone to 0.25, much smaller. Scale is equal to vector 1, 1, 1, back to where it was before. And then the next one is rotation. There's I guess 3 rotation modes. It's a whole source of problems and confusion, so I want to try to help clarify that. So pose.bones blorg dot, let's hit tab and I'll show you here. So these 4 commands right here: rotation axis angle, rotation Euler, rotation mode, and rotation quaternion. Rotation mode will tell us what the actual mode is for the rotation, but then you have to use these to change the data depending on the mode that it's in, which is really bizarre. So for instance, right now if I go rotation mode, it'll tell me it's in quaternion, and then I can change it to, maybe it's XYZ, and then I can double check XYZ. If I hover over here, it should change. There we go. And I believe there's the other one, which is the axis angle down here. Should be something like this. It's equal to axis underscore angle. There we go. And that has a W value just like quaternion does. Excuse me. So let's bring it back to XYZ because it's just a lot easier to work with for now. And I can go ahead and change things. And I believe the Euler changes in radians. So let's look at the rotation. So if I change the X rotation, it's equal to pi. Yeah, so it's 180 degrees, which is what pi is. That many radians around the circumference. Or if I were to change it to something smaller, I could go pi divided by 2, which is basically 90 degrees. Now here's the funny thing. If I were to show you what the .x information is, or if I were to change it back to pi to make it really clear, it's 3.14, which is pi, but here's the annoying thing. The rotation is reflected up here in degrees. So it's so confusing. So I could do like, if you were to believe that to change the rotation to 180, I could go 100 is equal to 180. It changes it to basically 180 radians, which is 10,000 degrees. And I think there's some way to do it. I always forget to have to reference it again, but it's something like is equal to rad 2 degree. I might have to pull in another module to do that. Rad 2 degree 180. No, pi degree to radian pi. Okay, I'm forgetting right now, but there's a way to convert between the two. So if you wanted to do any changes to the rotation mode, you'd have to be in the proper mode and use this kind of command right here. And then the next one's matrix, so I can basically assign all the data of the location of this bone, and I could change it all according to some other bone. So let's move blorg to bone 2. So for instance, pose bones blorg dot matrix is this whole goodness right here. And if we take a look at bone 2 dot matrix, so we have all this information where it's at. The interesting thing is the matrix is that's given is like this whole other different information, because I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe this is world location, even though right here it's reflected, the local location and information is reflected, which is basically zeros or default 1. So what I'm going to do is this: pose bones blorg bone dot matrix is equal to pose bones bone 2 dot matrix, and then I just moved it up to the location of bone 2. I'll just bring it back down. And then I wanted to show you something really cool with custom shape. For instance, we have over here this option to change the the shape to a custom object. So I'm just going to bring in, make it really easy. Bring in go to object mode, bring in a cube, and it's pretty big right for now. I'm just going to scale it down and apply the transforms, and then I'll keep it right there. So its name is cube. Context.object.name is cube. So what I'm going to do is go like this: pose bones blorg.custom shape is equal to bpy.context.ob. Let's do this. bpy.data.objects cube, and that should do it. Yeah. So the question is, why is it down there, all the way down there? Why did it move all the way down there? Maybe because something to do with the transform. I changed the transform on that. Let's see. It's possible. Let's try to make things a lot easier by doing this here. It's beyond me right now to troubleshoot that. So let's do this. Cube. Let's move it back to the world origin. Come on, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. Cube. I'm just going to move this away over here. And then for the custom object, we can see that it has this command here. Let's do it one more time. Boom. Okay, now what we want to do is change the scale because it's a little bit too big. So underscore tab scale XYZ is equal to, let's say, vector. Let's see what it gives us right here. Yeah, vector. Okay, is equal to vector 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. Ooh, let's close it. There we go. If I wanted to change just one of them, I could just say like, create a variable like my scale, something ridiculous, is equal to 0.5, and then I'll just do this scale vector my scale. I need to close it again, double parentheses. Okay, cool. And then the custom shape tends to be in, or is in, Euler, or like kind of degree kind of situation. So let's take a look at this again. It might be radians, however. Let's see. Shape rotation Euler. It's at 0. So let's change the x. It's equal to pi divided by something odd. There we go. That'll do it. So I just rotated it, and it reflects that it's rotated 60 degrees. And then just to conclude things, I don't want to go too deep into it because they can always like use videos of their own. But I just want to talk about constraints and keyframe insert. So using our blorg, let's just clear this out just to make things really simple. In fact, let's do this again. Let me show you how to clear that out if you need to through code. Custom shape is equal to bpy.data.object. Let's the cube, and then what I want to do is custom shape is equal to none. There we go. That clears it out. And then we can go with, let's talk about these constraints. Constraints, boom. So the interesting thing is the constraints down here is actually its own list too. So if I just want to show you real quick, let's just slap on some random ones like this. So I have, looks like 3. I'll go like this. Constraints, so I can even list it like this. But that's kind of messy, so let's go like this. For constraint in PoseBones blorg.constraints, constraint. And it kind of follows the same kind of method as referencing the PoseBones, so I can do constraint.name. And just like those, what I can do is go tab and see some more information about the constraint. And so what I want to do is just show you how we can kind of use this method for adding a constraint, a transform constraint. I'm going to copy the transforms of bone 2. So let's try this out here. pose.bones blorg dot constraints, and we hit dot, and then it should be new. So what is type? It's asking, it's saying, okay, let's try this out. I can't do anything with that, so I do have to put in a type, and it's telling me that pose.bone constraints is the type. So I'm going to show you how to access this type information, and what I'm going to bring down is a bright white window. So I apologize if it's at nighttime, because I hate bright white windows at nighttime, and I don't know why Blender is like super dark and gray, which is awesome for the eyes, but then like the documentation's all in white. It's too bad. So from the Blender docs, I can type in not Sea of Thieves or Hunt or Path of Exile, but I can type in what it said before, which is pose.bone constraints. And then I can go over here, and then there's a whole list of commands and kind of information, but the one that we want to look at is new type. Add a constraint to this object. The parameters are that it's an enum, and it gives a list of the enums inside of here. So here we have all these, and all these enums are actually strings, and I'm just going to do the copy transforms. So let's just copy that and make our lives super easy. And I'll take this out of the way. We won't be looking at the white anymore. So like this, but that won't work on its own. I have to put it in parentheses or in, let's see, so it's got to be like a string basically. So there we go, I just added that. I'm in object mode, which pose mode kind of works from object mode, seems like most of the time, but there are some quirks, just be aware of that. So I just added that, and then what I can do, let's do it again so you can see. Pose.bones, constraint, new, copy transform. There we go, we have this now over here, and in order for it to be working, I need a target. So instead of just clicking and doing this, I'm just going to do it by code, and I'll show you how that looks. We can go like this. Pose.bones, blorg. First we want to be able to access it. For constraint in pose.bones, blorg constraints, constraint.name. I misspelled pose.bones. Constraint.name. Just simply copy transform. So let's go like this. Pose.bones, blorg dot constraints, and just like we referenced the bone names, we can reference the constraint names. Copy transforms. Cool. So now I have access to this constraint right here, and I hit dot and tab, and we have a whole bunch of information like the target, which is the first that we need to start doing anything with it. So target, it's nothing came up. So what I'm going to do is target is equal to, what it's asking for is an object, not a bone just yet. So again, I'm going to go like this. I'm just going to go like this, bpy.context.object, which references the current object, which is just this armature. So that was happy, it's happy with that. And then it needs a bone, but the strange thing is, here's another one of these quirks. It doesn't need this whole long line of bpy.context.object.pose.bones. It just needs a string. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll do this, like we referenced before, and this is subtarget. So your subtarget is equal to bone2, and there you go. That worked. Now there's ways of creating and applying transforms through operations, and that all that I talked about earlier with the selecting bones and making a bone active plays into that, but that's for another time. You can just go down that rabbit hole quite a bit as well. And finally, I want to just show you keyframe insert, which has a whole host of stuff behind it, but I just want to give you the surface level just to kind of get your feet wet, your toes wet. So pose.bones blorg dot keyframe, and then we have two options, keyframe insert or keyframe delete. So I'll type in insert, and I'll hit tab, and it's going to give us some information, some helpful information. And it says we need to include a data path, and by default the index is -1, and the frame is the current frame, and you can even include a group for your basically the group is the name of the bone, for instance, that it's organized underneath. So I'm going to show this to you right here. The easiest way to go with this is to say, let's bring this up here. Let's go ahead and go to the dope sheet. I'll go to action editor, create a new one just super simple and clear. And then we'll go location. If I spell it properly, boom. And you can see a new keyframe setup right here. It's not grouped, they're not grouped at all, but it is set, and you can tell that's under blorg. And I can do something like this. Let's go location frame is equal to 60. And that sets a keyframe on the 60th frame. And I can do something just more specific. I could go pose bones, location. I'm going to keep it frame 60, but as I mentioned, there's an index thing. So index -1 means all the XYZ pieces of information. But if I were to specify just, for instance, like the X location, I can go index is equal to be 0, which is position, the first position. And then let's change the frame to 120. Oh, I accidentally tapped that in there. Boom. So it just added the X location keyframe for frame 120. Yeah, there's a whole other host of information that's kind of worth talking about with like keyframes and that kind of stuff when it comes to pose bones. But I'm just not going to get into that right now. So that's just worth another video. So yeah, I hope you got something out of this, and feel free to leave some comments, or if you have any questions or whatever, and you can see where we can go from there. So cheers, and have a good day.